Hey, Fantasy Gals! I'm Aubrey,
And I'm Peyton.
and today we are reviewing Rachel Gilling's Two Twisted Crowns, Book 2 in the Shepherd King duology.
Yes, so join us with a cup of coffee as we dive between these paper sheets.
Let's do this.
Alrighty, welcome back to the Hardcover Podcast. I am so excited for this episode. A couple weeks ago, we reviewed One Dark Window, so I'm really excited to get into this. But before we start, we have how our episodes run is we like to separate them into sections for the people that want to know more. Now, this is the second book in the series, so if you didn't read the first one, I can't really help you, but this is our NS section. We won't talk about anything in this section for book 2, but book 1 we will, give a little recap to catch everyone up, give our thoughts, our star ratings for book 2, but we won't spoil anything. So this is our NS section. Do not worry.
Two Twisted Crowns starts off in kind of a hectic spot because at the end of last book is when Elsbeth was in the attic, bedroom area, and she went full monster with the nightmare in order to attack and kill the physician and gravely injure Hoth Rowan.
Yes.
So we start, as all books should, with her floating in the nothing emptiness of the nightmare's mind. She's in a tough spot. So let's switch to the other characters because while the first book was in first person, this is going to transition a little bit and we're going to get mostly third person chapters from Raven and Elms just Raven and Elms?
Raven, Elm, and Elsbeth too.
Well, yes.
But yeah.
Yes, so we're going to get mostly Raven and Elm's perspective.
Yes.
Yes, as Raven is going into the dungeon and he's doing Captain of Dress Steer things because basically they now have to deal with this problem, which is where we also see Elm dealing with this problem. And the book's going to kind of take shape because what's going to happen is sorry. God. What's going to happen is that instead of just executing Elsbeth for doing this horrendous thing, committing treason and attacking the prince, they are going to reveal that Elsbeth is the nightmare. We don't try to have him pretending to be her at all, and he is going to tell the king that he can lead them to the lost twin elders card. So Raven's got a little quest in this book to accompany the nightmare and some other Justiers on this quest to find the mythical final card to unite the deck, the whole premise of book 1. And in the meantime, Elm's just in a little romantic-y story with
Ione.
Yes, it starts off from his perspective. This is chapter 2, where he is at the Hawthorne house, which is where Elsbeth and Ione grew up, and they're just searching for evidence because basically Elsbeth's dad and uncle is in custody of the dungeons where the rest of the family escaped. And then fucking Ione shows up and he's like, "You were supposed to get the fuck out of here. What are you doing? Now I have to arrest you." And we'll talk more in detail in it, probably a little bit in the non-spoiler section, but also in the spoiler section of what develops between them. But there are characters back that stay in stone the whole time to kind of see what's going on in the main castle while our other characters are on their quest in the woods.
Yes. Yeah. So the cool thing about this book, which once again, I felt like every book I read at the end of 2024 was just all multiple POV. But I actually really enjoyed, usually when these side characters like Elm, Ione, all of that come in, I'm like, go away. I want to get back to this
In the plot.
Yeah. But actually, I was rooting more for Elm and Ione's story than Raven and Elsbeth's.
Oh.
Yeah, just because Elm is he kind of, if anyone's ever read ACOTAR, he gives kind of Rhysand vibes of let's go break some laws. Totally.
Okay.
Aubrey does not agree with that. Aubrey and I never agree on anything on this podcast, ever. Every time I say something, I'm like, I got an opinion. Aubrey's like, no. No, you don't.
you might be right. I didn't think about it that way, but I was going to say that Elm at the beginning started icking me out a little bit,
Yeah.
but I'm not a Rhysand fan, so
Oh, that's fair. That's true. That's true. So the thing about Elm is last book, I really couldn't stand him. I was like, I just didn't care
yeah,
about him, so I wasn't
it
like
wasn't
paying
connecting with
attention. But
Elfin.
now
That's
that I was in his head, I was like, oh yeah, Elm is like this kind of like bad boy sort of like, but has like these deep rooted traumas. Whereas I feel like Raven's character was always just that like steadfast, like
yeah.
this is the way things need to be, and like totally just like wants to save Elsbeth at any cost.
No,
Whereas Elm is like people in this kingdom suck and like falls in love with Ione,
I thought Elm was a whiny little bitch.
which
I was
makes sense for you.
I was floored being in his head. Now, I still later on I started to really appreciate their story, but
Yeah.
at the beginning, one, I thought Elm was older than Raven, and then all of a
Really?
sudden, like in book one, I did.
Oh, okay, I'm like he always like talks about how he thinks of him as like an older
Yeah,
brother.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So in book one, because he was such this like stoic, like mean, mysterious prince, right? Like we're getting more, I would say, Azriel vibes from him in book one, where you just don't really know this character because that's not like Elsbeth's story, right?
Yeah.
And then we go in his head, and he's immediately like, "Daddy, Daddy Raven."
Yeah, he's like, "Where are you?"
Such a little spoiled brat, and I just like am horny, and like I don't know. Sometimes he was just immature at times,
Yeah.
and then he was showing just how young he was, which was fine once I got used to it. But
Right.
there's nothing that I hate more than being in a man's head when he's like thinking about a woman.
Yeah,
like,
no, it is. Yeah, there were some parts in this book. There were some lines I was like, "Ugh, no."
like
But then Ione would say it in her head, and it was fine. So I'm like, "All right, the
yeah,
double standard I have, which is fair. It's my book. If I get to pick and choose what I like and don't like." But when I saw Elm had POVs, I was not excited. But by the end of the book, I was like, "Okay, cool. This is fine." Of course, my favorite POV was Elsbeth's. I just thought it was so cool to see her kind of discovering to be in the nightmare's head, and
yeah.
I don't know, that was so much fun to read about.
Like a whole different realm, especially just how it opens and she's just drowning in the ocean, and then she's on the beach and she's just like you don't understand where she is. It's like this liminal space, and I
Yeah.
thought that was really fun. I do Here's the thing. I don't know if I liked that point of view her chapters were in first person and everyone else was in third. Like it would have been weird if we would have switched her perspective to third because the rest of the book's in third since we had a book with one.
Yeah.
I think it was the right choice. However, it was uncomfortable for me at first when we continued to go back to her POV after like the prologue and we were like switching POVs. And I don't know why because even like The Last Olympians, the Percy Jackson sequel series has multiple POVs and everyone's in third but Percy who's in first.
Right. And
Just
it's kind of rooting them in the story as this is the main character.
yeah.
This book is about this person's.
Yeah, it was
Like,
just a little strange. I think that's like a warning label. Like be prepared when you go in if you haven't read the book yet that you're going to have to shift between first and third. And sometimes you don't even notice. I mean, we read Wayward and there were three different like POV types in there and a lot of people didn't even notice until it was pointed out. So,
yeah, and for me, I couldn't like thinking about this book, I couldn't like I honestly probably didn't even notice. And honestly, you know what? But I can distinctly remember feeling the shift in my head when I'm reading the
yeah.
boys' POV versus Elsbeth's, because Elsbeth's always felt like that feeling of coming home. It was like this, oh,
Mhm.
this is a character I really know, because first person, you know everything about what they're thinking because it's first person, whereas there's a little bit of mystery involved with third, and that's why a lot of fantasy books are so much fun to read, because it's like you're kind of just observing the story, whereas Elsbeth is literally letting us know everything she's thinking.
Yeah.
So
I
yeah,
think
I think it felt like coming back to your own conscience versus like seeing what other people are doing. So
even
I
how I
don't know. It's interesting
first
writing technique.
Yeah, even how I picture it, first person for me is like looking outwards, like I'm seeing through her eyes, whereas third person, I'm seeing it like a movie would, where I'm
Yeah.
like seeing the shots.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it
I'm
changes a
seeing
little
her.
bit.
Mhm.
Uh, let's talk about the writing style of this book. If you have watched our One Dark Window review, you already know what we're gonna say. It's all praise. It's all beautiful,
Mhm.
wonderful praise. I It got better even, I think. I think the writing is just so clean in this story and so like sharp where she's getting the exact sentences that you need and it's witty and it was very romantic. I think this book was a lot more romantic than the other one.
Yeah. Yeah, I think
Honestly,
she was able to build the right amount of tension in a very
yeah.
polite way.
Mhm.
Um and I think she wrote romance in a very delicate way.
Yeah.
Especially given some contents and triggers in this book, she was able to, I think, approach them in like very sincerely,
Yeah.
and that shows through in the writing. But yeah, it's very to the point writing. It's not very flowery. We're like, okay, I can skip this paragraph. Like I felt like I needed to listen and or read every word, which
Yeah.
but then she was still able to make it feel like a fairy tale at the same time. So then,
I think it's prosing. I think it's still elevated in like the language word choice, but it's like very specific, if that makes sense.
yeah, yeah, she was able to go in, write, and cut, and still keep those elements very prevalent
Mhm.
in the story to also make this a gothic fantasy novel.
I love the
So yeah,
gothic stuff. I mean, even the ocean scene, which we talked about, is just the prologue of Elsbeth in this mine drowning. I think she did so much in this book about bringing the magic of the woods. Like, if One Dark Window is exploring this idea of like we're outside of the woods. The woods are the mist and they're scary and we don't enter it except for like one chapter. I feel like this book was more like, okay, we're in the palace, we're in the dungeon, we're in the
the
woods.
woods. Yeah.
Exploring that was so much fun.
All right. So after finishing the both of this book, this duology, I have to say, if there's one thing I could change or suggest that would have been really helpful as far as
Yeah.
world building goes
Mhm.
is especially in this book, there's a lot of times these cards are mentioned, and I love the cards. It's probably I said this if you watch our last video, which is a vlog when we read this book, is that this magic system, this story is one of a kind. I haven't read anything ever really like it. I love it. But with that being said, I think what would have been helpful if
Okay.
Rachel Gillig would have put some sort of guide for the deck of cards for us in the book.
Mhm.
And I one other booktuber on here even said like if she would have done a like guide to this, I would have bought it just as a collector's item because there is so much amazing world building, but sometimes you're like, what the hell does that card do again? And then you're on those like fan wiki pages trying
Mhm.
to do it. So you don't have to go back to book one and find the one sentence explanation. And so in the
Yeah.
book, they do mention like this is what this like she did a good job, but for like a basic reader just trying to enjoy themselves and isn't like reading this like it's a textbook,
Yeah.
like, I don't need to be quizzed on what these cards are for. I just want to, like, it's a map. Like, let's just flip back, in this book. I know the first one, they may have even had it written out, but I'm just like, I just need
Yeah.
it. In this book, I think that would have been very helpful.
Brandon Sanderson does that where at the end of all of his books is like a little overview of the magic system that you can reference as you're reading, especially because they're so long. Like he doesn't re explain stuff a ton. Like you get it once and then you got
Yep.
to check it yourself. But that would be such a cute little like collectible to have like, what do they call it? The old book or whatever? Like what the Shepherd King wrote.
Yeah.
That would be so fun with like art of him, especially because in this book we get to see a little bit of in flashbacks of him making those deals. That would be so cool to like get art of.
There's so
And then
much
little
history. And we go back in time later in this book a little bit, which we'll talk about later, but it would be nice to see more stories from that time and like art and like you said. So
yeah.
that's my only thing with the world building. But other than that, like A plus 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 plus.
So no, and I think she expanded it really well. I know we talked about this a little bit, but like going into the quest and going deeper into the woods you found out like so much more. Where I don't know, like book one, we're very much focused on our like city castle. Like Blunder is just a city and some outcropping houses and the single king castle area. And so expanding the world a little bit, I really liked. Um, I also have to issue, I don't know if it's an apology, but a statement towards Peyton because during the review of One Dark Window, I was talking about how I just didn't think it was I didn't think like the love plot between Raven and Elsbeth was all that special. I loved the
I
book,
do remember that.
but I was like, I don't know. I think he's like a C plot compared to other dealings in the book. And I stand by that. I still think One Dark Window is more fantasy than romantasy.
Fantasy.
I know
I
it's getting
agree.
marketed as romantasy.
I wouldn't have liked it if it was more romantic. I think it was the perfect amount.
Yeah, and I think this book actually amps up the romance, especially between Ione and Elm.
Yes.
But I want to talk about because I got to this one line in the book and I was like, "Oh, Raven, you're killing it." And this is like 20% into the book. It's not there's no spoiler here. But he's basically using his nightmare card to talk to the nightmare. And he goes, "She has a name, Parasite. Say it or don't speak of her at all." I was getting a little sassy for our girl.
Oh yeah, he fell right into Elsbeth, and I knew I was like I know Raven is just going to like lead this next book.
Yes. Well, and he felt so much in this book, like he's going on a quest to reclaim and save his love, like this, like tortured knight almost.
Yeah.
He's like, I need to steam ahead. I need to like, I'm all I care about is getting my girl back. I don't know. I thought this book definitely was. You were right, and this book was more romantic.
Yes. Yeah, she really amped it up. All right, so star ratings
Yes,
for series, book, whatnot. I think this is really easy.
obviously,
I
yes.
think we're both giving it 5 stars. I said this because I gave the last one 4.5, and I was
Mhm.
like, it could easily be a 5 star, but I need to get to the end of this, and I was like 5 stars. If you watch the vlog before this podcast episode was posted, this is a 5 star series. It was my favorite series of the year. 5 stars, 5, 5, 5.
Stars. Obviously, 5 stars. I love the first one. I love this one too. I think that there's something so incredible between these pages with the world building, with the writing, the characters. And you know what I really want? I want art pieces of this story in my house. Like, everything was so atmospheric and she did settings so incredibly well that I can just like see it in my mind, and I want like a poster of the One Dark Window and Elsbeth and Raven and the Nightmare in the Corner and Ione in the first scene when she's like in her white dress, which we'll talk about in the next thing. Like I feel like this was so like the imagery popped the fuck off in both of these books, and I just really love it.
All right, we are going to jump into our spoiler section. So, if you want all the deets and our feelings on this book, please stay. This is also a great time to mention that it is a new year and we have a lot of new friends. But if you're not subscribed yet, this is the perfect time to just
Please.
click. And so, it helps us and supports the channel more than you know, and it keeps us coming back every week to give you some very bookish content. And while you're there, like and comment what you thought about this book and what we should read next.
All right. Jumping into the spoiler section, I want to talk about one of my favorite scenes right in the beginning. We talked a bit about earlier is Elm bringing Ione back to Stone because when I think the whole time, like Rachel Gilling always has such imagery in her writing, but this was like, I know you crafted this specifically to feel like a gothic, like almost horror painting. Like, you know, those paintings of like the girls, like what's that popular horror thing where it's like the girl with like the black hair and the white dress and she crawls out of the
Oh, like
TV?
The Ring.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It felt like not like exactly like that, but like it's pulling upon those same like tropes and emotions of Ione being in this like white gown. It's drenched. It's covered in blood and dirt, but because she's using the maiden card, she's got this pristine beauty in her face and her hair. And by the time they arrive at Stone, like Elm didn't fucking give her a cloak, but because she can't like feel things, like I don't know, she never said anything about it. And so there's like this quote, and he's like, I got off my horse and she was there like a frozen doll painting of like a bride with like blue lips and like, and I don't know, like something about that I was like,
Yeah, because the maiden card heals, but she's still feeling the pain.
yeah,
She doesn't
like
feel the
she's still
pain, but her
so,
body is. Yeah.
it's just crazy.
I love when he gets there and he's like, "What are you doing here?"
Yeah, when he's like, I thought I saved you.
Like, girl, what are you doing? And she's like, I just don't want to go back.
She's like, I left something at Stone.
Yeah.
Which, it's also wild seeing all of this. We get more insights of how Ione was treated when she, like, after the exchange. Because through Elspeth's POV, like, she was like, I told you not to fucking do this. And then I think there's at one point where Elspeth's like, I can't believe, like, she's using the maiden card this much. Like, da da da. And, like, almost like shaming her without knowing the whole
Yes.
story. Like, not in a way that I think Elspeth was wrong for from her knowledge, but then to be like that very first night is when Hoth did abusive things
Yeah.
and hid the card. That's insane. Like that changes kind of your perspective of her. I feel like I never was like, oh, I never wrote her off in the first book because I felt like there was something like hidden there, but it really like deepens what she was going through.
Yeah, I didn't in the first book. I was unsure. I felt really sad for Ione. I knew that her storyline was going to come back. I just didn't
Yeah.
know if it was going to be as like this. There was nothing. There was no redemption for her because she was innocent. First of all, she was told what to do. And this book is very a man's world, and women are just living in it, sort of thing. Women don't really have a lot of autonomy or say over what happens to them. I think Elsbeth just has really like skated under the radar. She's just kind of that like Cinderella, like stay home clean, and then Ione kind of gets put in these dangerous situations. I didn't know if Ione was going to come back as this like we saved her, like thank God we got her away, which we did, thank God, or she's gonna come with a villain arc. I You never
Mm-hmm.
know. And because she has been so close with Elsbeth, but just the way that Rachel Gillig wrote her character, I was like, no, this is a good girl who literally is just being forced to do something, and she knows she has no say. Whereas I think Elsbeth had a lot more like an initiative in her, where she's like, fuck that,
Yeah.
no way. Like,
Because she had to be hidden, she kind of never had to be like prattled about, and social etiquettes didn't mean as much for her because she's like, I'm gonna die in 2 years. You know what I mean? Like she didn't have
fuck it. Yeah.
as much stake on the line. So
As
it was
Ione did. So like I never like condemned Ione. I was more so
no,
just like, oh,
yeah.
this sucks. You know.
I also loved when we're back in Stone and they're visiting Hoth in the like coma patient room,
Yeah.
and everyone starts freaking out, and Elm freezes the whole room. Or no, maybe this is the throne room scene when they're
Yeah.
interrogating her Ione's dad and Elsbeth's dad.
Just pauses them.
Like that's so crazy. And then I started taking notes in this book, guys, when we first started reading the book in like the middle of December, and I was like, "Oh, I'm going to take notes like every few chapters," which is why I have on here that I thought it was so cool in that throne room when he freezes everyone. Obviously, we're in the spoiler section now to note that that was just a hint. That was just a tease, because later when they're escaping, like actually escaping at the end of the book, Elm freezes everyone in the castle for what, hours
Yeah.
before he finally drops it. Like that's insane.
I just really think it's like Elm going from this like Hoth was like the heir, the blah 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 blah,
Yeah.
and all of a sudden like Elm's just like the young princeling, whatever. And then over this book, he kind of grows his power, his
Yeah.
ability to use, and so he kind of like claims it as like, I'm not going to be like my family because my family fucking sucks.
Oh, and I love that the nightmare like recognized that in him. Like the entire time of book one, Elspeth's talking to him, and like she doesn't realize that like the nightmare is like interviewing him from behind her eyes. Because the whole time Raven's like, I don't like says to the nightmare at some point, like, I don't want to be made your king. And the nightmare's like, the fuck you mean you king? I never fucking wanted that.
Yeah, he's like, not
I
you.
have other plans.
Nightmare straight up was like, Elm's my boy. The nightmare like had a crush on Elm. Sometimes the nightmare
Yeah.
would say something about Elm, and I'm like, Nightmare, like
Anyway.
he would be like, "Where's Elm?
Have you guys
Elm
seen Elm
needs to be king." Yeah,
I also I listen, I wasn't surprised by it, but I think Elm's little marriage scheme where Ione was promised to the heir and he's like, I'm so big brains. I'm so big brains to get to call her my wife. Like, I don't know. He just felt so proud of himself in that moment. And I think that's where I was like, it was a little childlike because I guess like I you just like understood what was going on the whole time and it was framed as if it was supposed to be this like reveal.
yeah,
But he's just like, I'm not gonna tell her, but I'm gonna make her my wife. Like all these people are like rooting for me.
yeah. And I think for her, like when he's like his father, like you need to like pick a wife. For him, he's like, I want to marry her, but I just got her out of this position
Hmm.
from having to marry someone horrible, but I want to show her that like she can marry me though, and I'm not that horrible. And like he talks about how he saw her when she was young and how he always really liked her freckles and her gap and all of that. I don't know on here, and I also don't know. Oh, I see down there. I'm gonna wait
Yeah,
then.
it's just kind of a mess. But
No, that's fine. We were on the Ione Elm love plot, and
yes.
I was thinking about the part where she's healing, and that part for me was crazy to read. But if we want
Oh,
for that,
we can do. Let's just do all of Ione and Elm
yeah,
stuff, and we'll switch gears. Yes, I. Well, one, her backstory reveal that night, Hoth literally pushed her out of a tower. Like, what in the twisted like Rapunzel shit is that?
I know. He's just like, what an ass.
Like, you really thought that Elsbeth was going through it, but honestly, she kind of skated. She kind of
Yeah,
skated in this plot compared to Ione.
when she's healing and just starts screaming, I
Yeah.
was like, oh my gosh, like yeah, duh, like.
Well, Hoth stabbed her in the chest.
I know, and then he was like, you're my guinea pig, you're my experiment to see if this
Yeah.
is gonna work. And I was like, oh my gosh.
That's insane. And I kind of love that Rachel made Hoth the main villain and not really the king. Like the king was like bad in the way that like men are just generally shitty.
And enabled
You know what
it.
I mean? And then he just like died. Like Hoth just murdered him and then was like it was actually Elm.
I just really feel like what I liked about that was it wasn't like the kids versus the big guy. It was really like
Mhm.
not they're not kids, but they in this realm like
Yeah.
kid. It was the kids versus the kid, not like you know the
Yeah.
this king and like obviously the king sucks. I just feel like a lot of times in fantasy books, it's like these 20-something-year-olds versus this 60-year-old
Mhm.
man
Yeah.
all the
Yeah.
time.
We're in the adult space and it is so much nicer to be here sometimes.
Yeah, it's like, okay, we're like against our brother, not like, oh, your dad sucks, by the way, let's go kill him. I mean, we do anyways, but only because he's just part of the evil.
Yeah, it was more about like being against the evilness of like the Rowans and bad men in power than being against like a child against an adult. Yeah. Which also I could have used more reminders in book 1 that Raven's supposed to be like 30 cuz
Yeah,
keep
I
forgetting
know.
that.
It's fantasy. They don't tell ages.
Yeah, they have to be like
Yeah,
3
but
decades
in
and
fan art, they're all going to look like 23.
I'm 2 and 20.
Oh, yeah.
So obviously we start like a lot of Elspeth's chapters are kind of just vibey.
They
At the
are
beginning,
vibey. One page, like
like dark, terrific, horrible for her, vibey, but like vibey nonetheless. Because she's just kind of like floating around in the nightmare's consciousness, not really understanding. Something that I loved is that once she makes it to shore and she starts getting like these like almost hauntings of the Shepherd King, which we learn his name is Taxus.
Texas.
Um, once, which also, side note, actually, I'll talk about that later. Sorry, I was like, oh, let me say it now, but it'll make more sense later. When she keeps seeing these hauntings of his kids on the beach and they're saying like these sentences and they're like, why won't you play da 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 da, to then later from the nightmares POV see the whole scene and hear that those were not just like, because I thought when the kids were first saying it, it was just like, oh, like the worst things that they've said to him. No, it was the last thing that they said to him, and he ended like his last moments with all of his kids kind of sucked.
Yeah. Yeah, but like imagine in your head that is what's on replay all the time.
Replay, yeah, yeah, and to know that your kids got like brutally murdered, except for one, because of you.
Yeah,
I
that
also
that,
I
that
love that in seeing the Shepherd King's like in seeing his backstory, he didn't suddenly become a good person. Like he's kind of evil and bad. Not evil. I would say he's
he's
morally
the
gray.
he's like the anti-hero of the story where you're like I want to root for him. Like there's
Yes.
just something about like I need to root for you because you're innately wrong, but
Yes.
actually there's good in you and like it's like that's why I think like the anti-hero just like is just the best of any story because you're just like oh fuck. Like
Yeah. Well, and I think flawed characters are so much more interesting than our perfect characters, and we just
yes.
have been getting so much perfect characters lately to learn like going back to Risan, which that type of character arc where you start off, you think that like this guy's really bad and horrible, and then the backstory is revealed, and like he was always good from the beginning, and he's such a great person, and now suddenly this character is stripped of any flaws in the narrative, and they're just pristine and perfect. No, we went back in the Shepherd Kings, and he was like, I didn't fucking care about my kids. I didn't give a shit about my wife. I just wanted magic. I just wanted to save the kingdom so much that I sacrificed literally everything. Pop off, Rachel.
Yeah. Yeah, and also just to see like what happens to those people after they
Yeah.
do that cuz I feel like in stories they just, wither away or whatever. Like to see that and the progression is great. And I do think that's what gets people to fall in love with characters in
Yeah.
books like this, and I think that's why fantasy is so popular because you get this like hate this person and then you fall in love with this person and then it's like then you form this attachment to them and then it's weird, but I just think she perfected it in such a way where we weren't like we love the nightmare, but we're like I think I like the nightmare.
I think
Like
he was kind of fun.
I was like I think I liked a nightmare.
I also love that the nightmare really did love Elspeth. Like at
He
the end of the
did.
day, like he really did care for her, and he's like, oh, like I want to care for you in the way I never cared for my children.
Yeah, I think Elsbeth was like, and I think that's what made us fall in love with the nightmare is that he did have this sort of protection for her, but it really was like the father she never had, like the uncle,
Yeah.
like Uncle Nightmare out here. Uncle Taxus just, kind of confusing us, but then he wanted what was best for her. What I never felt like he was totally just using her.
No, no. And even though yeah, I think he was complex, but at the end of the day he didn't would never have done anything that would have like super harmed her. His intentions were always to after he did his thing
Yep.
to give her back her body, which was amazing. Pop
Yes,
off.
because he literally took her body. See, that's the thing. It's like so crazy. It's like he
Yeah.
was protecting her, but then literally shut her out from the world and like basically killed her and took over her body. But I
Yeah.
love during these scenes when like the nightmare is like all of a sudden like Elsbeth has this like man strength like can
Yeah.
do like she was carrying Jesper at one point or something
Uh-huh.
and it was just like no like
Thinly little girl, and then
yeah
she's, like, got the strength of the nightmare.
yeah I thought that was so funny. I was like, because we're not watching this like a movie, but when like Raven or anyone's talking to the nightmare, you're picturing the nightmare, but it's actually
Yeah.
Elsbeth's
It's
body.
actually awesome. No, and wouldn't that be so funny if they did a film adaptation? Because they also, like, in the book, we referred to him as him the entire time. Like, that entity, that physical, like, person, they're calling him, but it's Elsbeth. And, like, I remember Elsbeth was like, "Can you at least brush my hair?"
Like, I do not look good.
That's exactly what I would do. I would be like, "My man's looking at me, like, make my ass look good."
And I think a lot of times Raven would be like, "But you're not her," because I think so. Like he's kind of like, "Ugh, you kind of look."
Yeah, and didn't he say at one point, he's like, "I kinda like that she's so dirty and messy hair," because it was either him or the nightmare was like, "Then he doesn't look at me as such in, like, love because he's able to, like,
Separate it.
dissociate the 2
Because that's
images."
hard. Like, imagine the
Yeah,
person you love more than anything not being that
possessed.
person, and you have to be like, "No, you look like her, but you are not her."
Have you ever, like, gone up behind someone because you thought they were one person, and then you, like, touch them or something, and then there's someone else? Like, I imagine that's what it's like, where every time you, like, look at them and you, like, go to touch with a familiarity, and then you're like,
Like, wait, what?
"Wait, what?"
That I remember that it actually happened to me once, and I've done it so many times to people.
Yeah.
But I remember when I was young, I was at Lake Erie on vacation, and this boy came up to me and goes, "Sis, we're leaving. Sis, we're leaving." And I turn around and I'm like, first of all, my brother would never call me sis,
Yeah.
and it'd be like, "Hey, bitch, we're leaving." And I turn around, and this young boy goes, "Oh my god!" He was little. He's like, "Oh my gosh!" And I'm just like, "What the fuck?"
Hello.
But anyways, yes, like I cannot imagine that. But Raven and the Nightmares relationship in this book, that's my favorite. That
That's
is my
amazing.
favorite.
Okay, and I have to say, I'm like, I'm not actually a mastermind because I kind of I guessed, I think we guessed it in book one review, and then I don't have it on here. But again, I was taking diligent notes in the beginning, and I wrote down that they have like this almost like disapproving father and rebellious boyfriend vibe, and like rebellious son vibe, and I think that is true, and I want to talk about that.
I love it. I love
But
it,
like,
Aubrey.
I basically, like, kinda guessed that they were going to like, they're actually, like, it's actually your granddaddy. Like, the fact that they're related, actually, and, like, from the Shepherd King's vibe, the entire time, he's, like, scruffy and making fun of and, like, mocking the Raven. Like, he knows, he's like, "This is my descendant. Like, this is what I got."
It's what I got. And the funniest part is Ravens out of everyone, you would probably
Yeah.
want Raven to be like, you know what, we got a good one. But like he was I think just really
He's like, "I would have rather had Elm."
yeah. Yeah, the Shepherd King's like, why couldn't it have been Elm? But it is really funny because I think that the Shepherd King is that much harder on Raven because of that.
Yeah.
Because he is the descendant of him. He's like, "Well, you're not going to make any mistakes I made." And so he is disapproving in that way because anytime maybe Raven would be a little cheeky or something rebellious, he's like, "Wait, no, you're my descendant." Whereas like, but Elm's fine. Elm can do whatever he
Yeah.
wants. But you know.
Sure. But they're just like kind of fighting over her, and I'm like, dang, the nightmare needs to have like one of those like prom pictures where like the guys with like the dads with the gun, and then the kids just, like standing there. Like
Yeah.
that's how I picture the nightmare's energy. I want to bring up another thing from our One Dark Window episode is that Peyton, you kept talking about the nightmare being there when they're having sex,
Oh
which
yeah.
even funnier to be like your ancestors watching you bang. Like, you know how people make jokes about like grandma watching me like fuck up in heaven? Like,
Yeah. It's like you think about
actually,
the
Raven's granddaddy was there. But I love that Raven, like, one of his first questions to the nightmare in the very beginning is that exact thing. I have it here. Raven stopped in his tracks. "Were you there?" he said, keeping his eyes forward, forcing ice into his thinning voice. when Elspeth and I were together.
Yeah, I was about to say the way he said like fucking, he was like together. Like it was like
Together.
when we were privately together, and the
Yeah.
nightmare's like, oh no 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 no.
What the nightmare says, "What's the matter, highwaymen? All your rosy memories beginning to rot." Like the nightmare's such a dick. He's like, "What do you mean?" And then later he's like, "No, I wasn't there." But like, I love how at first he's just like, "What's the matter?
Yeah,
You're not
I
believing
love
this?"
Nightmare teasing Raven about that. Is like also that like older like uncle like
Yeah.
what and then he was just like, but no really no, I just had to like wash dishes in my mind or something.
Yeah,
He
it's
was
just
like says
kind of a quiet place that I go to.
yeah, there's a quiet place I go to. Like, all right, fine, sure, whatever, Nightmare.
Me to be traumatized by my children so I didn't have to see your penis.
Yeah, I had to be yelled at by my kids.
Yes. Okay, now let's move into the quest, which I thought was going to be a larger portion of the book. I think it was still significant, but like we really did
It-
spend a lot of time at Stone, which
we did,
I think
yeah.
was worth it.
But the quest, like, it was pretty short for me. I was like, oh, that's it. But I think I liked that because
Yeah.
sometimes that shit gets dragged on a little too long, and you're like, dude, we've been in this forest forever.
So their first like little test that they had to do. Oh, well, first, I love the fact that it's revealed that the nightmare, his magic, like his that he can do is move trees. And he's like, "Did you think I shepherd sheep?"
Someone said that one of a booktuber was like, I understand that like they can't say like oh my god or like oh gosh or whatever, like they just say trees all the time
Yeah,
because like that's like he's
that's
like,
their
but I
fantasy.
kind of got tired of it, and I'm like, no, but it's so funny because the other day, speaking of trees, I can't believe we're talking so much about trees on a podcast. The other day I was like, oh my goodness, and I lived, and then I was like trees, and I was like, where did I hear that? Like, is that just like an old thing? Like, I've heard a lot in life. Like, people just go, oh, trees. No, it's fucking One Dark Window because they say
Yeah,
it so much in this series, which I'm fine with, by the way. Like, I'm cool
he's
with it.
fully built
But
in.
it unconsciously, or I guess subconsciously, in my mind is integrated so
Yeah,
heavily that I am now saying it not knowing where it's not even like, how people like incorporate things in their vocabulary like sound cool to like they know
yeah.
the lore. No, that
No, it's
wasn't that.
ingrained.
It's just so ingrained that I was like, trees.
Trees. When the situation's that bad, you're pulling out fantasy vocab.
And I didn't even know. So if you guys hear me say trees, just know I don't mean to. Just imagine
Mhm.
I'm saying geez. Like, oh
Just,
geez.
just
Yeah.
know that I'm also a little embarrassed of
Yeah,
this.
I'm like, where's this from? I even asked my mom, I'm like, did we say this? And like, I was so confused. She's like looking at me like I'm crazy. And I'm like,
Yeah.
oh, and it just hit me. I'm like, oh my God, it's from this fucking book.
Yeah.
Anyways, moving
That's
on. Shepherd King can move trees. That's crazy.
yes, wild. The other thing, okay, so then they show up for their first little quest thing and they have to swim across the lake. And I kind of thought that was stupid. Like,
That,
I like the
yeah.
idea, but like, what were there like sirens in there or something? I don't know. It didn't seem that hard.
No, yeah, there was some, like, it wasn't until they got, like, I felt like finding the Twin Alder. Like, I feel like that was, like, not that hard to get to. And then once we were
Yeah,
there, it was like, oh, we're here.
it's kind of like if you know where to look, like you could very feasibly like retrieve it, and no one just risked it for the biscuit. No one looked because all of the people who had been like fed to the mist. Well, we'll get to the people who have been fed to the mist without their charms, but then after the lake, we meet a whole fucking civilization. Like a whole bunch of people are popping off in the woods who've been like exiled, and I think that was fun to like talking about the world building. Like it really expanded to be like, hey, no, something happened to these people. There are people out there.
Yes, and then that's where the theory of Rachel Gillig's new book that's coming out. They feel
Yes.
like worlds may be connected, and I'm so down for
Mm,
that. I'm
I would
so down
love
for
it.
that. So we'll
I don't
see.
know if it's going to happen or not because we don't talk. So, like, that one's got a lot of gods in it. And we don't talk about gods a lot in this. But I also feel like Blunder was so isolated with the mist. I think even at the end of the book, there's that quote where it's like, now we can unite, we can talk to the other kingdoms. that, like, I just love an interconnected series.
Yes.
Also, I don't know, did you like the scene where when the people kidnap them and they give them that, like, juice or something? I don't remember exactly what, and it makes them fight and start killing one another, and that's when, like, Raven's, like, mask slips. I thought it was I was like, I it's not that I disliked it, I just feel like it wasn't as monumentous as it was written to be.
Yeah, I just felt like let's move on. You know what I mean? Like, okay. I
Yeah, like, him and Jesper just kinda, like, yelling at each other, and he's like, "Now my true emotions are being shown," and I was
I
just like,
think it was just I think that was used to show a progression of Raven and like cuz he
Yeah,
does wear this mask of like this is who I really am. This is how I feel and like obviously him and his like it's one of those things like, oh, we don't really talk about our feelings in this family.
yeah.
And so now they
Mhm.
had the opportunity to do that before, people potentially get killed and things like that.
Yes. So, I don't remember if there was anything else, because basically then they pop up and they spend the night and, like, oh, no, a bunch of time passes later, so I don't know. They spend the night.
A huge amount of time passes. Yeah.
Yes, but they
Mhm.
go into what I'm gonna call and refer to almost like the spirit realm.
Yeah.
And that's where they find, like, the valley of just dead people, and that's all of the people who entered the woods without a charm, and they just race in because Jesper has to take off her charm in order to guide them to the center.
This part I love, and this is the lore of this book I love. Just like
Yeah.
the imagery of that. And in the first book, we saw people go crazy running into the mist without charms. They hear voices, like all of that. And we're like, what is it's spooky, it's scary,
Yeah.
it's thriller-esque. Like, what is this about? And we get answers. Um, and we kind of find out some really grotesque things.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and it's so crazy that it's so obviously Jesper's the one who removes her charm to do it. But I think in book one, we see through with Elspeth, Jesper like kind of lost in the woods for a little bit. So like the fact that like for parallels one another, and then it's Jesper who they have to follow. I do think that the Raven was a bit of an idiot, and maybe that's like I love the phrase where it's like book characters don't know that they're characters in a book. Like you can't expect them to know like what genre of a story they're in or whatever. Because from my mind, knowing that this is a story, I'm like, yeah, of course. Like the nightmare said at the beginning, we need some spares. Like I thought they were gonna have to get sacrificed, which they kind of did. But he was like, I can't believe you knew all this time that Jesper or Peter was gonna have to give up their lives. And I was like, well,
Yeah, I mean, kill them off. Like, they're like side characters. I really didn't want Jesper to die. I really liked her. She reminded me of Rosalie from Twilight. Kind of sassy, really protective, but just a sweetheart inside.
Yeah, and I loved the parallels of Raven having to give up his sister and the Nightmare having sacrificed his sister to speak to the spirit of the woods. But then, like, after this encounter with the spirit of the woods, like, the Nightmare feeling such guilt because Raven's like, no, I'm not going to give up my sister. I'm not going to leave up my sister. That he's like, I'm going to carry Jesper. This is how I feel about my guilt. And
Every
so Peter's
generation betters itself.
like,
We do not take generational trauma with us. And Raven said, no, this ends with me. It ends now. Yeah, and then I love and we can go back to like what the Spirit of the Woods was about, but that's
yeah,
the Elsbeth part. I'm like, Elsbeth does not have the strength to be carrying just through the woods here. But when they get to Peter, he's like, give her to me. Like, do not carry her.
well, yeah, he was like, the fuck off, actually. Um, so let's talk for just a quick moment because I think some things that are super vibey, like there's not much to say besides the fact that like, yay, it was super vibey. But we enter into the spirit of the woods realm and meet the spirit of the wood. And I like the fact that it was like an ocean because that felt very close to. I don't know if it makes total sense. I don't know if it makes total sense that the spirit of the wood met at the ocean and not in like the thick of a forest. But like once they popped through the portally thing and went into the realm, it did like kind of bring back that liminal space of the prologue.
Yeah, because we see that with Elsbeth as what she sees, and then he confronts that, and then this is where he really gets a sense of like what's going on, because Nightmare, even up to this point, is kind of like, well, I'm not
Well,
telling you anything. We just need the Twin Alders card. And Raven's really like, he goes, Elsbeth, step aside. I am the main character.
he said, "This is my moment."
Yeah.
Yeah, Ellsworth really didn't do that much in this book. I
Except
think, like,
scream at
yeah,
Nightmare.
except well, and what she told the Nightmare to like punch someone or something like that. Like,
Oh yeah, and he was like, she's the one that told me to do it.
it's like, which love it. I love that her like character was still fully there and present, even though like I fully felt like she was in the story.
I do too.
Like thinking about what she did, it wasn't much
I love
because she.
when she would say something and Raven would be there, and Nightmare's like, she did not like that. Like he's like the translator. Like,
Yeah.
Elsbeth is yelling at you right now, or like
Or when the Nightmare would lie and be like, Elspeth says she's never gonna love you again if you don't get up. um, but meeting with the spirit of the wood, I loved the almost fey nature of it and how they had to barter, and it brings back all of those flashbacks you've seen the of Nightmare originally making these trades with her to then Raven making the trade. I liked the reveal that they were related. I think that that was fun. I think it was very well. I think it was foreshadowed in a way. It wasn't shocking, but it was satisfying. I This is the moment where I had a little bit of an idiot moment because she's like, to make this trade, you have to tell me like your name. And then he said his name was Taxus because that's him like coming to the conclusion that he's a descendant of the Shepherd King and all of that. But I thought that Taxus was the Nightmare's first name.
no, you're not dumb, because I did too.
And
And
I
then I
was
was
like,
like, is Raven a reincarnated Taxus? Like, how did they do this? Like, I'm lost. What plot did I miss? And I'm like, no, because they
yes.
talk about how each family has a tree, and it's the
Yeah.
Taxus tree that actually,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
now, and I was like,
I needed it dumbed down and explained to me. Because
okay, that's
the
just the
last name.
family's name.
Yeah. Yeah. And that didn't hit at first. And I think honestly, if we would have just spent more time calling the Nightmare by his full name, like first and last, or would have called one of his kids like first and last, that would have like helped click it a little bit better for me because I didn't recognize Taxus as a tree name either.
No, it was like really like subtle. I think she really wanted it to be like a big bang
Yeah.
at the end. But it is funny because when the she's like, I'll give you hints, and if you
Hmm.
don't get it, like blah 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 blah. She's like, what's your name? And I was like, well, it has to be a relation to the Shepherd King because we're learning
Yeah.
about this family and blah blah blah.
Hmm.
So no, you're not stupid. I did the same thing. I was like, wait, what? This can't be
Yeah.
it, because what? Because the nightmare's still kind of alive, and like I was confused, but
But
I
it
really liked it.
worked out. It was his last name. I think that's a little weak of a trade, to be honest. Like you're getting the Nightmare card, which when you unite the deck, it like pulls back like the Spirit of the Woods, like power or whatever. Like it was something she didn't want to give up, and then her like reveal was like complete your character arc.
Yeah.
And the card.
And I think it was one of those things, she was like, maybe Raven was the one that had to like unite the deck because of the lost family or
Yeah.
whatever. But yeah,
Yeah.
and then so he gets the Twin Alders. These dumb fucks are just dilly dallying.
They didn't bring the deck. Why did you not, like, you were going on a quest, and I understand the King of Stone not sending them with all the cards because he wants to be the one to like do it for show and such, but they had their own set of cards. And if you die on this mission, like you're going on a mission to get the one and only card with the one and only person who could give you this card. So if you die on this mission, then the rest of the deck doesn't matter. It'll never get united. Like, you might as well just bring it all.
Yeah, and then they only have a certain amount of time with the card,
Yeah.
right? And then it turns out that like using the Twin Altars card, like time moves differently. And then when they were like, "Oh, we only have a like couple hours now because we've been just chilling with the card," and I was like, "Oh my
Worse.
gosh."
Yeah. Well, I thought at first that the way because obviously there was a time jump with their perspective. I thought we were then going to learn that everything that had been happening with Elm and Ione had been stretching out over those months, kind of thing, like their whole arc. And then that's when they finally met in time. But that's not true. Ione just spent a few months in the woods. Elm spent a few months being tortured, and poor Peter just was left just
Just looking.
around,
He was just like, "I've just been here, guys, on my horse and like,
just waiting for you to come. But I do understand, like, giving the sense of urgency because it was said that the deck had to be united on the solstice.
Yeah.
And so, like, needing to kind of be at the solstice for your final arc. Like, I liked the time fuckery. I just was like,
It created
okay.
I was like, "Oh my gosh, what?" Like, it took me by surprise because there's, like, a sentence explanation. I was like, "What the fuck?"
Yeah.
But
Yeah,
then
they're just like, "Oh, now there's snow." Like, when they went in, it was frost, and when they, like, came out, it was, like, an inch of snow.
yeah, it's like, "What just happened? What in the Narnia?" And it was
What
just like, "What the hell?" And then it created this sense of urgency to
Mhm.
get us to our finale.
Oh, also kind of giving Percy Jackson. I know you haven't seen Percy Jackson, but in the quest, he literally goes on this quest and then has to do something at the summer solstice instead of the winter solstice, and all of them gets trapped in this Lotus casino hotel where time is funky, and when they come out, they have like hours before the solstice.
Oh my
Like,
gosh.
it's literally giving Percy Jackson, which I love. Like, it's
Yeah.
everything else is different enough that like this isn't like plagiarism or anything like that. But I was just like, oh my god, my two favorite stories have a
Similar
year
thing.
in the
Yeah.
space before the solstice. Final epic battle. Shepherd King's like, lock in, folks. I have a plan. His plan was very smart. I liked his plan. I didn't like Raven's execution of the plan. What did you let's hear Peyton's thoughts
For
on the final
for what part? Like, let's
any.
recap.
Okay, so I think the final battle was a little rushed,
Yeah,
but also
that's what
I
I'm
didn't
remembering. I
spend a
was
lot of time in it.
yeah.
So they're out. They're like, shit, we have minutes left. And the Nightmare's like, I prepared for this. I have it's my moment now, Raven. Step aside. I want to be the main character. And so Hoth had gathered everyone at Castle U, including the brother Emery, and he was basically just waiting for them to come out of the woods with the cards, and then he was going to steal them all, but Hoth was going to like destroy it or whatever because he didn't want to unite the deck because he was like, I can fearmonger the deck's not united. And so they're like burning the U's like house and shit, and all of our main characters are in the woods and the U family's all tied up. And the plan was to just separate the U's and then like beat the fuck out of Hoth in order to get the all of the cards that the U's have been stored up to then go to the One Dark Window place altar and unite the deck.
Yes, and I do remember Elm. This like there was so much that happened at the end of this book. I was like,
Mhm.
"What?" And it felt rushed in the aspect of like the main part of this book and what I was excited for was the very end with Nightmare and Elsbeth, and then the Spirit of the Wood. But I just remember Elm being like, "It's all right because you know what? Raven's gonna come and save us."
He's like, Daddy's got me.
Yeah, he's like, "He's gonna be here soon. Do not worry." And I love when Nightmare shows up and he's like, "Elm."
Elm, my son, my prodigy, my legacy, my king. So here's my thing is they have this plan, and a big part of the plan is obviously to get the cards from the U's and get to the altar because they have to unite the deck by midnight on the solstice. Otherwise, they'd have to wait till the next solstice, and at that point, Emery, the brother, would be dead. We're on a time crunch here. Raven has the ego of a man, has a little male ego, and the Nightmare, also being a man, lets him get away with shit in the way that I know we didn't get to see it, but Elsbeth in the Nightmare's head had to, like, we just needed a woman to be like, what the fuck are you doing right now? Because Raven has the Nightmare and the Mirror card. He has two of the cards we need to unite the deck. And Raven's like, I'm going to 1v1 Hoth. And the Nightmare's like, yeah, that makes sense. You need to do that for your pride. I'll go. What do you mean? They literally have a conversation. These two idiot men have a conversation where the Nightmare's like, hey, I'm here. You want me to help? Like, we could 2v him and we could get him down in 2 seconds. We could
I've got
fucking win.
this.
Hoth is literally up, like, juiced up on maiden juice, so he cannot die.
Yes.
And Raven's like, no, I want to do this by myself. I have my male ego to think of. And then the motherfucker almost dies. And then the motherfucker cannot 1v1 him. And if we would have just 2v1'd him, I understand, like, you do some stuff for the plot, but
Yeah,
like,
this was
what
just for the plot.
is
This was merely for the plot of, like, Raven's gonna die. Because at the end of the last book, we thought Elsbeth was dying.
Yeah.
And so it's just, like, a reversal of...
Because then Raven can't even use the maiden card. Because of his desolation. I was like, what are we doing? Why don't we just take Hoth out together? But they didn't, and it just extended the plot a little bit, pushed us a little bit closer to the end, and people can be healed. Everyone but poor Elsbeth. Because if she touches the card, then she'll just
yeah.
absorb it.
So how did you feel about the Nightmares, like, see ya?
Goodbye.
We thought, well, everyone was like, is he not gonna say goodbye? Like,
yeah.
What? Like, don't leave. Like, stay.
It sucks that, like, you lose that character now. But I do think that it was very bittersweet of him being like, you're gonna have your body back. Like, I did all of this to set you up. Like, I got my elm on the throne. Blunder is saved, and he was like, none of this matters if I can't give Elsbeth her happy ending. Like, if Raven fucking dies. So I thought it was sweet, and I thought it was one of those moments where the Nightmare's like, I got you, boo.
Well, and he even said a line in the book that was very much like, I promised, I said this, we did what I was supposed to do, and now it's over. So the ending was great. I was also happy that there wasn't this crazy Raven and Elsbeth marriage thing. Like, I love that Elma and Ione got that in the end. Like, I
Yes.
really love that. So I think it was the perfect ending to the book. Highly, highly, highly recommend.
Yes, I love they're telling the story because that's how Elsbeth kind of got consumed by him at the end of book 1. They're telling the story and she goes, I couldn't go on. Elsbeth, no, I'm not ready, not yet. Finish the story, dear one. My voice shook. The two were together. So the two were the same. The girl, he whispered, honey and oil and silk. The king. We said the final words together, our voices echoing, listless through the dark, a final note, an eternal farewell, and the monster they became. And
Like, the poetry in this book, like, and the final wrap up.
Yes. Yeah. Also,
Love
the
everyone.
fact Ione was like, yeah, no, I'd love to be queen. And then
I was like, no, I'll be queen as long as, like,
Yeah.
I love you. Everyone gets their happy ending.
And I loved final thing here is like we're in the outro scene where like the screen's starting to black out and we're becoming like a little bit of a circle, and she's like kissing and like talking to Raven, and then in my mind she just turns to the camera she goes, and though it had taken slow, painful time, I knew who I was without him. I was more than the girl, the king, and the monster of Blunder's dark twisted tale. I was its author. What a good last sentence!
Rachel! Alrighty, so this was an amazing freaking book. I loved every second of it. I'm so happy that Aubrey and I got the opportunity to read this. But as always, please like and subscribe. It helps more than you know. We have memberships now. So if
Join
you
the
want,
hardcover fam.
yes, there's lots of cool incentives and exclusive content coming your way. And we just love you all so very much. Thank you for being on this incredible journey with us.
Yes, thank you so much for joining us and happy reading.